So imagine you wanted to build a better, freer, and happier society. What kind of tools would you even need? Well, it turns out a 19th century philosopher left behind this powerful toolkit of ideas designed to do just that. So let's dive in and see why the thinking of John Stuart Mill is honestly more relevant now than ever.
So this is the man himself, John Stuart Mill. Born way back in 1806, he was a philosopher, an economist, a politician, a civil servant, but those titles really just scratch the surface. By any measure, he was one of the most powerful and influential minds of his entire era.
And that's no exaggeration. I mean, his ideas on liberty, on happiness, on equality, they literally went on to shape the very foundations of modern liberal democracies. So what that really means is, to understand the world we live in today, you kind of have to understand Mill. Okay, so to really get the man, you have to start with his childhood, which was, well, it was completely extraordinary. His father, James Mill, didn't just raise a son, he basically conducted this intense high-pressure experiment to forge a genius from scratch.
Just look at this. The intensity is staggering, right? This wasn't just, some advanced reading. This was a complete intellectual immersion. While other kids were outside playing, Mill was inside debating the finer points of Aristotle. The whole goal was to mold him into the perfect champion for a philosophy called utilitarianism.
But this experiment had an absolutely devastating cost. At just 20 years old, Mill completely collapsed into a deep depression. He had this horrifying realization that even if he achieved all of his goals for social reform, he still wouldn't be happy. It was only after he started reading the poetry of William Wordsworth that he rediscovered emotion and joy. And that was a turning point that would profoundly change his philosophy and really his entire life.
And that personal crisis, it actually became the foundation for his first major tool. See, he didn't just throw away the philosophy he was raised on, utilitarianism. No, instead, he rebuilt it. He made it more human, more nuanced, and way, way more profound.
So the basic idea, which he got from his mentor Jeremy Bentham, is pretty simple. Good actions are the ones that create the most happiness for the most people. It's almost like an ethical calculator. But for Mill, this was just too simplistic.
And this is where Mill adds his game-changing twist. He argued that we have to think about the quality of happiness, not just the quantity. He basically split pleasures into two tiers: the lower physical sensations and the higher pleasures that come from our minds, our morals, and art.
This is probably his most famous line on the topic, and wow, it just captures the idea perfectly. For Mill, a life of intellectual curiosity and moral struggle, even with all its frustrations, is infinitely more valuable than a life of just simple, unthinking contentment. So, the first tool in our kit is all about seeking a higher form of happiness.
All right, now we get to the absolute cornerstone of his entire political philosophy, the second tool in our kit. And it's this single, elegant principle designed to protect every one of us from the power of the state, and, maybe even more importantly, from the power of the crowd.
I mean, just think about what he's saying here. Mill is drawing this clear, bright line in the sand. Your freedom is absolute, right up to the very point where your actions cause harm to someone else. Your own good, your own personal morality, your welfare, that's your business and nobody else's.
But Mill's target wasn't just dictators or kings. He was worried about, us. He was afraid that in a democracy, public opinion, what he called the tyranny of the majority, could become so powerful it would just crush dissent and eccentricity and individuality. The harm principle was the shield against that kind of crushing conformity. And this, of course, is the big question that people have been debating ever since. It's one thing to say prevent harm, but what actually counts as harm? Is being offended harm? Is creating a dangerous idea harm? Well, Mill had a pretty practical take on it.
So Mill drew the line with this really useful example. He said, look, the content of an idea isn't the issue. You can publish radical, even offensive opinions in a newspaper. That's fine. But the second you express that same idea in a way that directly incites a mischievous act, like shouting it to an angry mob that's ready to riot, you've crossed the line from speech into harm. It's all about context.
So armed with these new principles of higher happiness and individual liberty, Mill turns his attention to the biggest injustices of his time. And in doing so, he proved to be a thinker who is radically, almost unbelievably ahead of his time, crafting tools for social change that we are literally still using today.
You have to understand, when Mill started advocating for the rights of women, he wasn't just met with disagreement. He was met with open, public mockery. This caricature from a popular magazine tried to paint him as some kind of unmanly philosopher for even caring about women's equality.
But Mill was completely unfazed. His commitment to this was absolute. He saw the subjugation of women as a barbaric relic of the past, something that was actively holding back all of human progress. He fought for their right to vote in Parliament and laid out the entire case for perfect equality in a groundbreaking book that would become a foundational text for modern feminism.
And then there's this, which might be a surprise. While Mill started out as a believer in free markets, his views evolved. A lot. After witnessing the massive inequalities of industrial capitalism, he came to believe the entire system was flawed, and he actually started to identify with socialist ideals.
And this wasn't just some vague feeling either. He had a specific vision. He proposed a kind of market socialism, where the whole boss-worker relationship gets thrown out and replaced by a democratic association. He imagined an entire economy powered by worker-owned cooperatives, all competing in an open market. It's a truly radical and fascinating fourth tool in his kit.
Now, it is so easy to celebrate Mill as this amazing progressive hero. But to really understand his ideas, we have to face the deepest, most troubling contradiction in his work, one that sits right at the very heart of his professional life.
This right here is a crucial piece of the puzzle. From the time he was 17, Mill's day job was working for the British East India Company, the massive private corporation that ruled India for the British Empire. He wasn't just a passive observer. He was an active, high-level participant in the colonial project for decades.
So on the one hand, we have this Mill, the champion of absolute individual liberty, the one who believed this principle was universal and essential for human progress. It's the core of his most famous book, On Liberty.
And then you have this, a quote from that very same book. Here, Mill argues that his precious principle of liberty just doesn't apply to what he called backward states of society. For people he considered barbarians, he believed that despotism, ruling by force, was not only acceptable, but necessary for their own good. The whiplash is just jarring. And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? How do we make sense of this? Was his toolkit for building a better society only ever meant for certain people? Can we use his powerful ideas about freedom and equality while also acknowledging that the man himself failed to apply them universally? There are no easy answers here, and maybe grappling with that very complexity is the key to understanding why John Stuart Mill still matters so much today.